You are now watching an agorist production by We Are Change Texas Hill Country and Truth Exposed Radio, coming to you from Austin, Texas at Brave New Books.
So, anarchy is kind of controversial because it essentially says that, hey, anarchists of all stripes, people who want freedom of all stripes, let's put down the bullshit, focus on the common ground, and go towards that. It's essentially saying that at this point, what's most important is to outcompete and to build the next stage, not to argue about what all the social arrangements or economic arrangements are going to look like when we get there, if we ever do get there. Because, I mean, have you seen this? Certain people just spend all their time bickering over, like, which type of freedom, which type of anarchy, which particular strain of economic activity, or exactly what the private defense agencies are going to look like, whatever. We're not even there yet. So we need to, first one, propagate this message, which people like Adam do a great job of doing. Propagate the message, build the institutions that are going to help us get there, and decide that we have a common enemy. I don't even really like to use that phrase, but we have the opposite polarity of it. We have them doing what they're doing, and we're doing what we're supposed to do. They're supposed to be bringing tyranny, or for whatever reason, and we're supposed to create freedom. So, I also look to the anarchists of Europe who originally came up with the term anarchy without adjectives. It was started by some Spanish activists who started to see anarchists, and over there were more of the communists, like socialist, social anarchists, but they were having a divide between those who wanted individuality and those who wanted to focus on anarcho-communism, anarcho-syndicalism. So they started to promote this idea, like, hey guys, let's just focus on, move all the anarchy, communism, socialism out of the way. Let's just focus on our common ground and get to that point. So fast forward to the 60s, and there's a guy named Karl Hess who was really active in the modern libertarian movement, and actually I have mad respect for him, and we quote him at length in this book, because he did great work trying to bridge the divide between anarchists on the left and anarchists on the right, and just people in general, left and right, and really getting past those terms. And there was, in the 60s, there was quite the potential, and I think there still exists potential now, to, you see like Occupy and the Tea Party and these different, fringe elements that could potentially come together and do a lot of great things if they could get their shit together and stop being divided by the media. So they focused on that. Karl Hess came up with the idea of anarchism without hyphens. That was his version of it. The same idea, just saying that, an anarchist can believe in whatever God they want. They can work at whatever job they want. They can, that doesn't define what you are as an anarchist. An anarchist is somebody that simply says, I want freedom for myself, and I'm going to take the responsibility to get that. And I'm going to allow everybody else to be the same responsibility. Now, there's other arguments about what economic arrangements and the roots and the history of anarchism. We cover all that here and basically lay out our position that we think, that anarchism without adjectives is the best way to go. Like I said, I personally identify as an agorist, a market anarchist, if I'm forced to identify. But there's just a lot of common ground is my main point with that. We also look at collectivism versus individuality. I think I'm going to probably end with that one in just a second. But two other things we look at: animal rights, we look at animal consciousness, plant consciousness, and the idea of the earth consciousness, this earth being some type of living being itself or some type of living organism. And we look at various viewpoints on there. We establish our position, but one thing you got to remember, because there's a lot of material in here that I think could probably be seen as controversial. Like I said, some people are like, wait, they mentioned God, I have to turn away now, I can't read this. But we're not trying to say that this view that we present here is like, this is, obviously we don't believe in a monopoly, one-size-fits-all thing. I'm just saying, if you're interested in these ideas, you might find some value in it, and what our real hope is that we can spark the conversation, because as I said, there's no material out there, like, which is, to me, is just amazing. And left anarchy or right anarchy or libertarian voluntarists, there's really nothing that bridges these gaps and shows you the common thread between Buddhism, the Tao, Islam, Christianity, and a path for those of us in the modern time to pursue that could give us more freedom. So we look at those ideas of plant consciousness in the extreme, from people like the Earth Liberation Front that are willing to burn down buildings and put themselves up in trees to stop logging, and then the other side of people who couldn't give a shit where their food came from and what happened to it, what kind of poison were injected. And as usual, we try to strike the balance. That hey, I'm a vegetarian, John's not. I'm not advocating eco-fascism or saying that if you're not a vegan, you're fascist. I'm just saying maybe a little bit more awareness and consciousness of what we're doing with our diet, because hey, we're putting things in our body. It's pretty important. But I feel like, how many times do you eating while you're also texting and trying to watch something on Facebook or a movie? You're not really paying attention to what you're putting body. You're not conscious of that experience. So I think if we bring that back, start looking at our diet, looking at factory farming, all this stuff that essentially is held together by the state. That's the common thread. You start paying more attention to your health, spiritual, mental, physical, and you start looking at the institutions that are working against you. Those are the state and everything that's tied to them. We also look at balancing the feminine and the masculine, which is for a lot of anarchists and people on the right. I think feminism is a controversial topic or maybe an uncomfortable one, but I think we do a good job of striking the balance, basically saying we don't need to go one way, one extreme to the other. You know, some feminists seem to argue really like, and I would say this is extreme. I don't want to like generalize too much. There's an extreme position, just like with anything, that advocates more of female supremacy than any type of equality. And there are also those on the other end that have a counter-reactionary thing that want to be real aggressive and towards women, and also want to act as if women haven't been suppressed throughout history. And that's just, I think that's something we can all admit. So we're basically trying to say that, again, finding the balance between these perspectives, finding the balance between feminine and masculine within yourself, and being able to connect, and also not letting ourselves be divided. Gender, men versus women, like all these things, it's just another way of us being divided and separated, and put into another category that's easily divided and easily conquered. So we look at that as well. And then we also look at collectivism versus individuality. I'm about to wrap it up. Sorry if I'm going long. I don't know if I'm doing all right here. So two last things here. The collectivism versus individuality chapter is really something that I'm proud of because if you look at the history of collectivist ideology, it's pretty easy to see where it goes wrong. And if you go back even further to some of the first, they didn't call themselves anarchists, but for all intents and purposes, he was an anarchist. Josiah Warren, 1600s, was one of the first people to be here in America. And if you really think about how much of Americans were frontier people, and it makes sense why they wouldn't want the government, this far-off thing, telling them what to do. They're out here, like, scraping by, making it on the frontier. Josiah Warren was one of those people, and he worked with this other guy, Robert Owen, and tons of other people, basically launching the first intentional communities around the United States. And he has several journals describing his experience. And he went to go work with the Owenites and their community, and in his journal, what he says is the reason he believed, maybe this wouldn't work in every situation, but I think it's very telling. What he says is that the reason that that community failed is because they put the needs of the collective above the individual, and eventually that just clashed with their natural inclinations, and it just fell apart after a while. So what we try to strike the view here is that obviously the individual is important. The individual is the smallest minority that needs to be protected. You know, communism and some of the more extreme elements, Maoism, Leninism, these ideas that I've been studying recently, they really proclaim to care about the working class and the working man, but in the end they always suppress anybody that goes against that, and they totally forget that your collective doesn't exist without those individuals. So when you say this individual, it's okay for him to die because it's better for the collective, or they are willing to let people starve to death because it's going to be better for the collective, and I mean, this is a really horrendous idea. But that doesn't mean that there's no value to seeing ourselves as a collective human race. You know, I mean, there's value in the individual side, there's value in the seeing us as a collective. I think it's just not having collectivist politics. But one of the stories I put in there comes from a Buddhist parable about the jeweled net of Indra. And Indra was seen as this god representation of a few different things, but in this particular story, they talk about the jeweled net of Indra. And I think this is a great example of understanding the interconnectedness, the interpenetration between our realities and our worlds as individuals, but also as this larger, beautiful collective. So what they talk about in that is basically Indra had this net that was individual shining diamonds, and they were beautiful, you know, all around, reflecting light in all directions, and they were connected through this little strand that connected other diamonds, and it went infinitely in all directions. So each diamond was beautiful on its own, but also reflecting each of these others, and together, you know, they extended to make up what they said was essentially like that's what we are. We are Indra's net. Our reality is that. But I think that's a great, you know, anecdote for what we can look to each other as. We're all awesome, beautiful, free, independent human beings. Adam does a good job reminding people about that too. And as soon as we recognize that and decide, and I speak from experience, that I just didn't give a shit about myself back in the day for various reasons. But it was because I was dealing with things I didn't know how to properly deal with. So I was stuffing drugs in every orifice I could find and see if that would get me somewhere. And then I was, you know, just wallowing in my depression and things like that. I had suicide attempts and all this sort of stuff that eventually led me to that prison experience. And through that, I realized that I have to care enough about myself to find, my own path. And then through that, find freedom. And then through that, find self-love, which to me used to be a really corny, cheesy idea because I couldn't possibly understand how I could love myself with all these things I had going on. But since I've gone down that path and learned to embrace that and really try to just become who I'm supposed to be and use that as an example, I've seen it reflected in other people. I've seen other people inspired by my work and people who inspire me, and it spreads on and on and on. We see that radiate. So as soon as each of us decide in our own path, in our own world, I'm going to be the best, glowing light that I can be. I'm going to be an example of these things. You will see other people inspired by your actions. You will see those ripples go out. And we're going to see this change. We're going to see, I hope, the conscious resistance. And the last point I want to make relates to the healing. And in the healing, I discuss everything from meditation, which again, meditation can be a number of things. It's not just sitting in lotus position facing the wall. Look into it. There's all kinds of different ways that you can reach a meditative state of mind. Even if that means after your busy day of work and you're dealing with your kids or whatever, you spend 5 minutes in your favorite chair, turn every electronic device off, put them away from you, and just sit down and breathe. Count your breaths. Reflect on your whole day from the moment you woke up to that moment then. And you're going to remember certain things that you might have just glossed over in your busy day. And when that becomes a regular practice, it becomes much more easy to be in tune with yourself and your needs. And then from that point, it becomes easier whenever you deal with people who aren't as balanced to stop and to reflect. Now, I'm not just going to react. I'm going to think about this, I'm going to process it, and that becomes a regular experience. So meditation, also something I've gotten to recently. Got an appointment on Tuesday. Flotation tanks. Laying in these tanks are awesome. We talk more about there, but flotation tanks, basically this big bubble that you lay in naked that's suspended in water, salt water, and they turn off all the lights and everything, so you can't see. After about 10 minutes, your body and the water become one. And when your mind and your body doesn't have to hold itself up anymore, and you can just completely relax, all sorts of amazing things happen. I mean, you get visions. At the least, it's a powerfully relaxing experience. And I've been doing it now for a couple months. And that's something else you mentioned. As we also discuss the revival of psychedelic research, LSD, psilocybin, MDMA, all these things that were suppressed in the 60s after the Cultural Revolutions that actually have medical value and were shown even in the 50s and the 40s to have medical value. They're now giving them to terminally ill cancer patients. They're looking to treat people with nicotine addiction. PTSD is a huge thing. How many soldiers we got coming back with PTSD? And instead of putting them on those pharmaceuticals that just push them towards suicide, we see things like cannabis, we see MDMA, and these other experiences that, under controlled settings, the right settings, because you have to respect these substances. I think they're teachers. You have to respect them for what they can and do to you, because if anybody's ever had a mushroom or an LSD trip and you decided you wanted to push it, you saw how far back they push whenever you go too far. So you have to have respect for those experiences, and the world's rediscovering these. And there's so many amazing techniques available for healing that I think may be generally outside of the perspective of the average libertarian voluntarist. And we hope that you guys will start to open your minds and your hearts to these ideas and really see what healing can look like. Because as I said, the revolution without healing is going to be a disaster. So let's create a more free world by working on ourselves. Thank you guys.